This episode of the Linux Action Show is brought to you by the good-looking folks at GoDaddy.com. Use our code Linux and save yourself some cash. And welcome to the Linux Action Show, Season 24, Episode 3. My name is Chris.
And my name is Matt.
Hey there, Matt from the remote Linux Action Show testing studios this week.
I am remotage. I'm a satellite.
Yeah, you're in our satellite action bureau. Oh, I like that. Let's go with that.
That's cool. Yeah, let's definitely stick on that one.
All right, why don't I tell folks about what we have coming up?
Let's hear it.
In today's episode. All right, so this episode in the second half is going to be all about securing your Linux box. Now, I've got years and tips and tricks from the server side, and Matt's got years and tips and tricks from the desktop side. We're going to combine our two strengths together to give you a finely blended security recommendation this week that will be perfect for your desktop, for a laptop, or for that home server that you might have just set up after watching last week's episode. Plus, in the last half of the show, we're going to cover some of your feedback. But in the first half of the show, the section we're in right now, first it's going to be our picks of the week, and then it'll be the excellent news of the week, including, of course, the Steam beta news, some more Ubuntu shuffle stuff that, you know, you just can't seem to avoid these days,
No.
and a bunch of other really cool stuff, including some neat new hardware. In fact, Matt, that brings me to my first pick this week. Should I do my runs Linux?
Let's hear it.
All right, Matt. This week, the Parallella supercomputer runs Linux. Now, Parallella, boy, that's a trick to say, right?
That's a very tricky name.
This was a Kickstarter project for a quote-unquote supercomputer. Now, I don't know. You might be able to debate the term supercomputer, but their goal was a $99 Raspberry-sized computer that has some really compelling hardware specs in terms of like multi-core. So here, I'll give you a little taste here, Matt. Now they're going to have different boards depending on what funding level they reached, and they reached $830,000.
No, that's not bad.
No, it's not bad. In fact, they almost got $900,000.
Wow.
As a result, Adaptiva, which is the company making this, will build a 16-core board capable of 26 gigaflops in performance.
Wow.
And that's $99, right?
That's not bad.
No, I mean that's Core i7 capable. Now,
Yeah.
the reality is the individual threads are like, somewhere between 600 megahertz to a gigahertz. They're not overly, rockstar fast. I mean, in reality, we're going to see some probably some better performance than we see on the Raspberry Pi, but I don't think we're going to see anything that's going to just blow people away. The other thing that I think there's a little bit of a warning why, this is just personally why I didn't back it, though I really do love the idea, is they're kind of pitching this, especially like in their video, they're kind of pitching this as a consumer device, and they're showing like, you're at home, you have it hooked up to your TV, and your daughter grabs the mouse and keyboard, and you just start browsing the web on your TV. But the reality is, and of course they've got like Ubuntu 10.10 in the demo video or something. I think, that's sort of setting the wrong expectation. Now, I think the people that probably threw in on this knew better.
Well, I think at the end of the day, we got to remember that you're absolutely right. The casual consumer is not only not ever going to discover this, they're not necessarily the right target. I think it's definitely going to be the geekier audience, and so they really should have appealed to that in their video.
Yeah, yeah, and and if that is my biggest concern, that's really not that big of an issue.
No.
It's not that bad. I mean, they got the Epiphany multi-core solution, they call it, where it's got some good tech in it. In fact, I think. There's an Ars article I'll include in the show notes that actually goes through some of the specs on it. But there's also going to be the first shipments arriving, and so they say, in February and May of 2013.
Wow, that's not too far off.
Not too far out, yeah.
Yeah.
The Parallella, Matt. How do you like that, huh?
The name's fun to say. Hopefully it'll be fun to use.
Or a challenge. It's a challenge to say. I think I did a fair shot at it. But,
I think it's probably pretty close.
All right, Matt. Well, now I have got an Android pick this week that is a little hardcore, but it totally fits in with the security theme that we're following this week. And if you are capable of installing this, you're going to be blown away with what it can do. So stay tuned for that. But before we go to that, we need to say good morning to the fine folks over at GoDaddy.com. Over at GoDaddy.com, the world's #1 domain name registrar. Look, guys, folks, ladies, gentlemen. If you want to make an impact online, GoDaddy.com has got you covered. Now, we have some special codes that are expiring at the end of the month.
Oh, that's coming right up.
I know. And they're really good ones, too. So I want you guys to get a chance to use them. Number one, 599.coms. That's crazy, right? 599.coms. Just use the code. When you're checking out, there's a little spot for a promo code. Use 599 Linux when you check out, not with a Y, with a U, and you'll get a .com for $5.99. Now, that's a great deal. Maybe you're saying, Chris, you know, kind of went on a .com buying spree this year. I don't need any more. To that, I'd say bullcrap. But if that's what you think, maybe you still have some renewals you want to get done. Maybe you have a few other things you want to take care of, and you just want to take 20% off your entire order. Now, this one's expiring at the end of October, so that means you really have this week to use it. We're recording this episode, so go act fast. But if you want to save 20% off your entire order, use the promo code GO20 off 6.
Oh, see, that one to me is a no-brainer. That's when you do all your re-up and just bam,
right?
One
That's
shot,
a slam
right?
dunk. That's a slam dunk.
20%, folks. I mean, good grief.
Or are you going to get yourself a WordPress, or you're going to try out one of their cool VPS solutions that I have been eyeballing? That'd be a great way to go. So go 20 off 6 to get 20% off. Those expire at the end of October, so thank you to GoDaddy for sponsoring for a long time now the Linux Action Show, and thank you to everybody who supports our sponsor and thereby supports this very broadcast. And good morning to Danica, who I was just texting with last night about how to secure her Linux box.
And how'd that work out for you?
Danica's got a secure box. Trust me.
Does she? Well, that's good.
Trust me.
That's good.
Nice and secure.
Awesome.
All right, Matt.
All right.
Why don't I cover my Android pick this week? Because, boy, is this a fun one. I even brought my Android out here. Even though you're not here in studio, like in spirit, I want you to kind of pretend like you're playing with it, okay?
All right. Sounds good.
So this one is a little out there, and it's not even available through the Android Play Store or through AppBrain or anything like that. You got to download it yourself and sideload it old school, but that's okay. You don't mind. You're hardcore. And that's called Dsploit, and you can find it at dsploit.net. Now, you might have guessed by the name what this is, but I don't think you can fully grok what it can do until I tell you a little bit about it. So you can download it right there on their homepage, and what it is, it's a full-on network analysis, identification, documentation, and threat identification tool. So it will run like a whole suite of tools, from ping scanners to port scanners, to OS fingerprinting, and then once it fingerprints an OS, it can go out there and say, okay, well, I know this is Windows 7, so I know that Windows 7 has all of these potential vulnerabilities. Now I will scan this host for all those potential vulnerabilities, and it checks for fingerprints of things that look like it might be an indication that it has some sort of vulnerability that can take advantage of. I scanned my system here, and I found a ridiculously embarrassing amount of vulnerabilities because I don't. The one Windows box I have here in the studio, I don't patch very often.
Right.
Dsploit is also capable of doing a lot of other really nice things, like replacement and capturing of packets. So if you're, say, on a Wi-Fi session and maybe you're at a coffee shop that's unsecure and people are browsing the web, you can actually capture their cookie sessions and then log into the websites that they're visiting from your phone. If you can also grab their sessions, you can do things like replace all of the images on their website.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can
that could be fun. I mean, that could be bad.
Yeah, from your camera library, you can actually send them. You can send them like you know, say you took a picture of a pumpkin and they're loading Facebook pictures. They'd actually see the pumpkin. So it's a very powerful tool. And honestly, I've been watching the video. I got to tell you, Matt. It's the kind of thing that when I was a contractor, I would have absolutely loved to have had access, right? Because I could go into the place, I scan their Wi-Fi systems, I get, like, you know, a list of all of their machines. Bob's your uncle, I can start doing penetration testing right there from my phone and get a real good idea of what's going on. And, you know, the fingerprinting thing's really nice too for kind of doing some just kind of getting a little inventory. So man-in-the-middle attacks is capable of basic login cracking. You can do. It has a very fast network login cracker which supports many different services. It'll try to capture the traffic and then break the passwords. Of course, it's also got just a simple traffic sniffer if you just want to just sniff all of the traffic on the Wi-Fi network. You can do that with Dsploit. And it can also find open connections to websites. So say if you have somebody that's on their Wi-Fi connection and they've connected to a website, you can actually have it go interrupt their connection and make it so they start getting 404 pages and not founds and stuff like that.
Oh, man.
It's pretty wild what you can do
crazy.
with this thing. Yeah, it's pretty intense. And it is a little heavy on the requirements. You got to have at least Android 2.3, so gingerbread, and your device must be rooted, as well as having BusyBox, a full install of BusyBox.
That seems pretty reasonable. And I think definitely this is one of those things to where with great power comes great responsibility. Little Spider-Man there for you.
Yeah, very, very well put, Matt. It does. It's definitely one of those things that you have to be a good boy or girl when you grab this, because you could walk into a business and you could mess with them. And, of course, you could also get yourself in a lot of trouble.
Exactly. So,
all right, Matt.
Yep, it's good stuff, though. I love it.
Good sage advice there before, because I got off all in the weeds with the excitement. I didn't mention the fact that you could probably get yourself thrown in jail if you're not careful.
Yeah, just one of those things. But it's cool. I love it. I think it's a huge security boon. So that's good.
Yeah, it is great for that, right? It is great for just checking yourself even and just seeing what you're vulnerable. And that's what we're all about this episode, is checking yourself and seeing what your own vulnerabilities are, and that's a great way to do it. Or, you know, with the holidays coming up, you go to family members, right? You know, let me check your Wi-Fi, see what you got going on.
I just put a stocking around my neck and say, insert cash here. I'll check your network, you know, all good. So, what's new in the news?
All right, Matt. Our top story on the news docket this week is an exciting one that lit up all over the web. And I got in early, and so I'm hopeful, but you never know. And that is, of course, Valve opened the floodgates to allow people to apply to become part of the Steam beta for Linux. That's right. It's not the actual official beta list, but it's a survey that you take, and you fill out the survey, you give them all your information, you sign in with your Steam account, and then at the end of the survey, you get added to the list of potential beta testers.
It's not bad.
I guess that's kind of how we expected it to go down.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way of allowing things to trickle in, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and make sure that you're getting the right mix of hardware and things like that. And now, so this is all coming. This is interesting. So this is all coming around the heels of a presentation that Valve will be giving at the Ubuntu Developer Summit tomorrow.
Wow. No, that's exciting. Okay.
And if you look inside like the Steam application database, it looks like there's a good chance that they're going to be handing out Steam beta access to attendees at that talk at Ubuntu Developer Conference. So it looks like they've created a promo code that they'll be giving folks at UDS, and the attendees will then be able to become immediate beta testers. So that's exciting. And you remember, Valve's already opened up internally to beta testing, so they actually already have folks using it. So it wouldn't be that big of an expansion to open it up to the UDS folks. But Valve did say by the end of October. Actually, they said in October, and that's October expires next week. Right? So
it does, but I'm sitting here thinking about it, and one thing that occurs to me is what a great way to control public opinion on this release. Because if something goes wrong, and it just happens to be a prolific writer that is very popular and has a lot of audience going for them, being able to kind of say, oh, well, they're going to be rocking this machine, or they're going to be rocking this opinion, or they're, you know, we've kind of got them prepped in a certain way to have a certain experience. I think that really this could really work out for them. So if there are bugs or there are issues, I think it'll be kept to a minimum. I'm kind of rolling that around in my head, and I think this is going to be interesting.
That makes sense. So that way they catch stuff a little early before it's in the mass.
Exactly. Right. And seeing, it's like Google's approach to everything. No matter what it is, just put the word beta in it, and it can crash every 5 minutes, and no one cares.
You're fine. Yeah. You're fine.
Remember Gmail beta? I mean, beta forever.
Yeah. Now, of course, there's a few places where you'll be able to get the latest Steam news. This show is one of them. But if you want something even more current than this show, Steam now has an official Linux beta access group. The official group from Steam, you go to Steam Community. We'll just have a link in the show notes because it's not a friendly URL. And there's already 9,834 members of this group that are Linux Steam members. There's 895 playing games in the group right now, 44 in group chat. 3,264 of them are actually logged into Steam right now, so they must have it for other platforms. This is the first place that Valve posted the beta link to get into the survey, and this is theoretically where they'll post any follow-up links. So if you want to really stay on the cutting edge, you can go follow this group, or just, of course, keep listening to this show. I joined. This would be a great way for, I think, people to sort of meet up, fellow Linux users to get in play groups and stuff like that. So
that's cool.
Find a link to that in the show notes if you want to go check that out. I recommend, if you're really interested in this, you jump on that, because I think that's how they're going to do it. And then next week we should have some information about what was discussed at the Developer Summit.
So, and that's something to hear, especially with Valve being there this year.
Yeah. All right, Matt. Now, this next story is also very germane to the Developer Summit because it's going to be a hot topic next week. There is a very, very easy way, if you subscribe to the right repo, to install Ubuntu on the Nexus 7 tablet. And
Wow.
we've seen videos and screenshots now of this in action, and it's the full Unity interface.
That is cool.
And it made it to Slashdot, and they called it Ubuntu for the Nexus 7. And
Right.
I've seen headlines saying 13.04 will ship with Nexus 7 tablet support, and that's all wrong. That's all wrong. 13.04 is supposed to boot on the Nexus 7. And what they have done is they have released a very cool one app. You download, you subscribe to the PPA repo. You download their single-click installer, and then in your launch bar, it launches a little Nexus 7 installer, and it says, what would you like to do? And you hook up the Nexus 7, and you click a few links, and it will install Ubuntu on that Nexus 7. It is not optimized for the Nexus 7. It does not have the touch interface has not been scaled appropriately to that resolution, that size device. It is with the intention to allow Ubuntu developers to fine-tune the subsystems, the kernel, a lot of the drivers, and that stuff to make it work right. It's
Makes sense.
It's not for general consumption. But I got to tell you, I mean, if I had a Nexus 7,
I think it's cool. But as you pointed out, and this is an example of a fancy-free loose beta. What's going to happen is, despite all this being clarified, lots of people are going to install it. It doesn't work right. Ubuntu sucks. And watch it happen. I promise you. And then some other idiot's going to write an article on it about how Ubuntu sucks because it doesn't support Nexus 7, even though they said it would. Even though it was clarified earlier that, hey, this whole thing was done specifically for development, as you pointed out. There is something to be said for some layering when it comes to releasing this stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's important it's public, but I think that darn it. I really hope that doesn't happen, but I think it might.
Well, we'll see. As long as they control it, the PR spin as much as possible. But people are just really excited. There's a lot of blog posts and videos up on YouTube of people getting this going, and it's organically spreading. Like there's not been any PR announcement. There's not been any big web page that's gone up with big glitzy graphics on it or anything like that.
That's good. That's good.
But it's still spreading like crazy. And I got to say, because who doesn't want? I guess maybe. This is kind of what the Surface is about in some ways. Is who doesn't kind of want this mythical tablet that's great in touch, but also push a few buttons and I've got a full-fledged computer.
Right.
It's just the execution has to be just right. The balance there has to be just right. It's from the early reviews, it sounds like maybe the Surface doesn't have that balance. Office is a desktop app and things like that. Now, could Canonical do it with Unity? Could they get that balance?
It's possible if they're able to, and I think, as you pointed out, they haven't done any promotion on it or whatever. People are just kind of running with it, and as long as people stick to that, I think they could. I think if development accelerates because of that, and enough people are getting on board and saying, "Oh, cool, I can run it," and begin building things for that, and they begin to refine the back end a little bit, I think it could. And as far as the Surface is concerned, I was under the impression that it was basically a tool that helped you dance in streets and do circles and stuff, because I thought that's what the commercial was basically telling us.
Things.
Yeah, and snap things. You got to clap the little clappy thing, and honestly, I thought it was for a dance school. I didn't know it was about a tablet. I was totally confused.
Yeah, well, I can understand how you'd have that mistake because they don't say what it is in the commercial.
What?
The other thing to remember with this kind of stuff, and this isn't just Ubuntu specific. Testing applications in this limited resources environment where you have extremely low CPU and every watt you pull matters, and you have very small screen sizes. Just getting developers to work in that environment and to see how their application performs with those restraints is good for getting any Linux applications running on these ARM chips with these lower resources. And you got to figure you start here and then it just sort of spreads out, and then pretty soon we'll have all kinds of applications being tested and optimized. And the Nexus 7 is a perfect tablet because of the price point.
It is. Another concern that I have about the Nexus 7 and about Ubuntu running on it is that because as it stands now, all these applications are designed for the desktop, and of course the detachment of most of these applications are run with no connection to Ubuntu specifically whatsoever.
Yeah.
Is there any motivation to adapt? Does anyone care? Are some of the applications that perhaps are built for hobbyists, are the developers going to jump on board with this? Probably not.
I doubt it.
That's going to be a problem. I mean, really, that's a problem that some of the closed source tablet guys are going to be dealing with, is that they're going to be fighting with the whole fact that no one has any compelling reason to develop on this.
Right.
It's chicken or the egg,
Well,
so,
and isn't that sort of the problem that the KDE Plasma team is taking head on? They're saying, look, we know we have to just build certain fundamental tablet applications, email, contacts. They're building it all themselves. The App Store is specifically built for tablets. They're building all these very specific tablet applications, and they've also come up with a very clever way to detach the UI from the application backend. So you can say, all right, well, they have Marble, for example, that great sort of Google Earth-like planet for the KDE desktop that you can spin around Earth and all that stuff. Well, that's written in a very nice desktop UI container, but that snaps right out of that and then snaps into a nice Plasma Active UI and runs beautifully. I've used it at Linux Fest. It runs beautifully on a tablet, and it's like they're able to leverage the work that the hobbyist developer did, but then still present it in a very mobile-friendly UI interface. And
there you go.
I think that might be the challenge, like you've just touched on, the Canonical has, because they don't have that direct end-to-end control over the desktop like that.
Exactly. Yeah, and that, I mean, just genuinely, as much as I enjoy various Linux distributions, as much as I enjoy, for the most part, running Ubuntu, I don't have any desire to run Ubuntu on a tablet. There's no. I mean, I would be apt to go Android. I mean, that just makes sense. Everything's already there. So I don't understand what their compelling desire or reasoning is to do this, because honestly, it's other than out of necessity for the company, for Canonical. I don't see where. I just don't see where the end user is going to be jumping on board with this over Android or over some of the other options. I think they got some really big challenges ahead of them. I'm really concerned. I think that if they were smart, they honestly, and people are going to hate me for this, I think they need to stick to the server and they need to stick to the desktop. I don't see any advantage to going to the tablet. I certainly don't see any advantage to going to the TV or any of this other stuff either.
I've often wondered if the TV and the tablet stuff is just a bit of a distraction and a waste of money. But I think they see a winning solution where all of these things play together really well.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, and I wish them all the best on it. I hope I'm wrong. I have some concerns there because there's so many facets that they don't have control over, and it's going to begin showing here pretty soon. And so that then of course gives people a poor impression of Ubuntu, which is not entirely accurate. Ubuntu is pretty cool, but they need to really focus down on the areas that they can control. And tablets just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. All right. See, I don't hate tablets as much as you, but I pretty much agree with you.
I don't hate tablets. If I want a tablet, I'm going to want to rock Android. That makes complete sense. Yeah, I mean, that's a great experience. But Ubuntu, I don't know.
Yeah. You got to be in a position where you need the stuff that's in Ubuntu in a tablet form factor, I guess.
Or a hybrid of the two. Okay, I can handle that. That's fine. So
while we're on the whole Ubuntu stuff, we got a couple more Ubuntu stories I think we'll power through, and then we'll be done with the Ubuntu stuff, and we'll move on to Extended Fork.
Sure.
So last week we talked about Mark Shuttleworth's kerfuffle, where he kind of came out and he kind of got a lot of people confused with his intentions for future direction of Ubuntu development. And we kind of came down saying, we think this is primarily came down to a communications issue and not being very clear about intention and sort of assuming people had an understanding about how development currently worked and how development works in other places, and then wrote based on those assumptions. So now Mark did come out in an interview and say, yeah, I think I kind of blew it on that, and I probably should have been a little more clear. But I find what interesting is now people are picking on him for what he said about Red Hat. Did you catch this?
No, I did not. Actually, I'm surprised I missed this one.
So when Shuttleworth was talking about this whole thing, and he was sort of saying, well, look, what we're doing really isn't that weird. It's not that odd. He says, this is from Mark. He says, Ubuntu set the standard for transparency as a company producing distribution a long time ago, when we invited anybody who showed a passion and competence to have commit and upload rights. A strong contrast with the Fedora policy of the time, which required you to be a Red Hat employee. There are any number of changes thrust upon GNOME by Red Hat, for example. Then that then get whitelisted as quote unquote maintainer's discretion or designer's design, and then are just slipstreamed in, and nobody has any say. And for the most part, I'd say Shuttleworth is technically right there.
But why poo-poo someone else's efforts? I just don't see the advantage to that. I could have started it off with saying, Ubuntu worked hard to set a higher standard or set a strong standard or something like that, leaving Red Hat and Fedora completely out of the equation, because honestly, it should never have come up. There was no reason to bring that up other than to start a fight.
Deflecting, yeah. And I know. I think there was some employees from Red Hat who were razzing him in the comments thread. Maybe that's what led to that. Well, it is. You're right. Why bring it up, and why not just say, "Look, this is how we do things"? And that was the fundamental miscommunications. People didn't understand. He was actually inviting people into a process that they've already had in place.
Exactly. I mean, I understand, his frustration, and I totally get that he was, upset about the whole thing, and that's fine. That's whatever. But to bring Red Hat into it is just so dumb. I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying that choice, the motivation for this doesn't make any sense. I just don't understand why you would do that unless. How does he not expect Red Hat and the employees to retaliate some? It just doesn't make any sense.
Maybe he's just trying to stoke a good old-fashioned rivalry.
Man, I guess, or as long as they take it to space. I mean, right? He's a cosmonaut. Let's do that.
Yes.
Little Star Trek action there. Yeah.
Yes. I agree with you.
Goodness.
All right. Well, let's cover our last Ubuntu story for the week. And this one, I'm curious to see what you think about this. Ubuntu looks to an SDK for improved app development. So now with the Development Summit coming up next week, this is one of the things to talk about on their agenda. While the 1304 cycle will not focus specifically on tooling for an Ubuntu SDK for app developers, we do want to kick off discussion and ultimately define the criteria we will use to access each one of the contending technologies and libraries we will include within a future Ubuntu SDK. And what I thought was interesting about that is I've had some conversations with Michael on Coda Radio, and he is primarily a Mac and Windows and mobile developer who is transitioning to developing for Linux. And when he came at it from the same approach when he goes to sit down and develop for the Mac or Windows. He said, okay, well, what are the platform's blessed toolkits and methodologies for me to develop for? And then how do I then turn that around and submit it to their app store? And what's that process look like? And what he came away with is, well, wow, I can use Python, I can use Mono, I can, for the front end, I can use Qt, I can use GT. There's all these different things, and I'm not, this integrates in with the messages menu, but this integrates in with XFCE Notify D, and this integrates with that, and if I want to be featured, I might want to consider doing this. And I never really even thought about this, because to me, I was like, you're just writing for Linux, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But from an outside perspective, if somebody wants to bring their applications over, they're looking for this is the avenue and the path that you follow. And to that end, they're also looking for an entire pipeline mapped out to how you get in the App Store. And that's something else they're going to work on with this is reviewing the process on how stuff gets into the store, how stuff gets into the software center, how things get into the repos and things like that. But Matt, my question to you.
Okay.
Does Ubuntu need an Ubuntu-specific SDK? And if they do, isn't that surely just a recipe to screw other distributions in getting apps onto those other distros?
I think that they can do an SDK if they do it as a preferred method and not the exclusive method. And when I say that, I'm saying that you don't want to necessarily shut out other people, regardless of whatever Linux distribution is. We'll remove the word Ubuntu and insert, XYZ distribution SDK. So I think it's for app developers. They don't give a flying fart about freedom or any of this other stuff. It's not so much a focus for them as to get the application out and to be able to do it in a cross-platform method. Being able to do it with an SDK makes a lot of sense for them. However, for the developers that already are developing for Linux, they may not like the idea of an SDK. So I think if they can cater to both audiences and they can just take a preferred approach with the SDK, I think it's fine.
That's an interesting idea.
I don't think that should be that big a deal. Obviously, one has to take a preferred stance over another. The SDK would have to take the preferred stance, and that's okay. But don't shut out existing avenues of development. That would be the only. And the way things have been going lately, I could see this actually happening, and I hope they don't. But
you mean like they'll say unless you wrote it, use it to our SDK, it won't.
Or maybe we'll write a blog post about it and talk about it. Yeah, jeez.
I don't think that's likely. I think you probably nail it. I think they're going to say this is the Ubuntu recommended, and if you follow this, you're going to have good results. You're going to have good integration, and you're likely to get approved pretty quickly into our store. I think that's what they've got to do,
and that would be cool. I think that's a great way to get all the the people that are thinking about bringing stuff over but don't really want to, or are finding challenges or whatever it may be. I think that's a great way to just streamline them in the door. So
and so in our live chat room, Nate W is asking Chris, are they talking about making an SDK for a whole app or just an SDK for more easily accessing Unity features? I think it would be a combination of both.
Could even be two. Yeah, could even be two separate.
It could. I think whatever SDK they go with would be, this is how we recommend you build applications and write them towards to run on Ubuntu. And if you do this, it means good Unity integration as well.
That's true. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Well, we'll follow that. Now, that's a ways off, but I know that there's people who watch this show who think about releasing software for Linux, and I'm not a developer. That was never anything that ever crossed my mind until really the conversations on Coder Radio, and then I really kind of realized what a challenge it was because these people, if you're not following the Linux scene for years and don't know that Python has these advantages but it has these disadvantages, and Mono can do these neat things, but it has this very long history of issues, and you don't know all this stuff. Without an SDK, it is kind of a shot in the dark.
Exactly.
All right, Matt. Now, I don't know how much you followed about this extended 4 flaw. We covered it actually on TechSnap this week. It's a flaw that's been found in extended 4 that actually got backported to previous, like all the way from all the way back down to, I think maybe even kernel 3.3, but definitely kernel 3.5. There's this extended 4 corruption bug that's been introduced. And they've been testing the hell out of this thing, trying to track it down. And Alan went over some of the tech details in TechSnap this week. But I'll tell you, there's been a follow-up since we did that episode from Theodore Tao, and Theodore Tao is trying to do some of this testing, and what he has found is there's this data corruption error that'll happen during unmounting if you unmount and remount or unmount just at the right time, and you have certain mount options that have to do with how the journaling is handled. There can be, in very, very extremely rare, in fact, he goes to great painstaking detail to say how severe, like he's done things like he's killed the machine during shutdown while it's mounting and unmounting, and he's got like extra scripts in there to mount, unmount like really fast and run it through stress tests and with these really crazy mount options, and he's still unable to reproduce it. But in some scenarios, you could actually lose data on the partition.
Well, and he mentions also that says that it may be caused by a DM snapshot bug. So but he's not sure yet. So he's definitely exploring this pretty thoroughly.
Oh yeah. It's gotten some press. This when you have a file system and then you backport the changes to previous kernels, and then you realize that there's a little regression in there that can lead to file loss. I mean, people really jump on this kind of thing. And what it really means is don't use. I mean, this is the number one way to avoid problems like this. So don't use crazy mount flags. Some of the mount flags they're talking about are stuff that have been added, semi-recently. And if you have a very important set of data, go with the specifics. Now, in this Google Plus post that we'll link to in the show notes, he specifically calls out what mount options not to use. And they are all relatively recent, and they all have to do with handling how the journal is either flushed or how the journal is managed. There's also a possibility that it's a combination with some RAID controllers. It could be certain mount options under certain scenarios with certain hardware controllers causes this data corruption. So
that's going to be really hard to duplicate.
Yeah, and it's not quite the panic it was made out to be, but it's still something to keep an eye on.
It's problematic, I think. Yeah.
All right, Matt, just a couple last stories to round out the news segment this week. Number one is a game we talked about before, a Kickstarter game called Planetary Annihilation. It has been funded. Now, Planetary Annihilation is a real-time strategy game where instead of doing just like a map, where you're zoomed in and it's like the seafront, and you got like ships and you're taking this little piece of land. No, in this game, you manage the entire freaking world, and you have combat going all over the world. It's got a great 3D interface where like the trees and the mountains pop up over the, and it just looks really great. And it is now going to be, it has now been funded, and it'll be shipping to Linux when they release it. And I watched the video of it. They've obviously gotten a ton of code down. The gameplay looks so fun, and it has this really neat cel-shaded look to it. So, like, when guys explode and stuff like that, it's got this really cool, like, cell look to the explosion. And as it goes, like, you don't just take over the world. You launch missions to the moon, and you have them combat on the moon. And it's really like this massive empire expanding game. And it looks like... I can't even tell you how excited I am.
Looks like a great way to spend a weekend,
Yes, right. So there you go. They've got funding, and it'll be coming soon. Gosh, man, if folks are watching the video version, the graphics.
It's just amazing. Yeah,
they're calling it a real-time strategy, a new generation for a new generation of gamers in a way they've never seen before. Total Annihilation is a total annihilation inspired gameplay on a planetary scale.
I think that's awesome, and I think they're accurate on that. I definitely think this is a very new approach to it.
And I love these I love that these Kickstarter games are getting going right with the Linux support.
Well, yeah. Well, and I think they recognize that opportunity, and because of the fact they're not wired into a legacy way of doing things, they can do that. They can, potentially look at different distribution approaches to doing things, or look to Ubuntu or whatever it may be, and say, "Hey, yeah, we can do that SDK thing you guys are talking about."
They chat room fill me in on the details. Number one, it says that eventually, as you conquer the planet itself becomes a weapon.
Oh, wow.
Nate W in the chat room says there's talks of 40+ player games, multiplayer games.
Whoa. Wow! Oh my gosh! Wow. Yeah, if you give me get me a Death Star, just have me kind of spin around and shoot and stuff. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, that is so great. Nice. I gotta say, I've mentioned the live stream a couple of times. We do this show live on Sundays at 10 a.m. Pacific, which is noon Eastern, over at jblive.tv, which is the video stream, or jblive.info, which is the audio stream. And you can give us your thoughts in the chat room as we go. All right, Matt, are you ready for our last story this week?
I'm all set.
This one comes from the Raspberry Pi, folks, and it's some good news because the Raspberry Pi gets open source down to its very hardware core.
Oh, right on.
Yep, the source is now available in the userland repository on GitHub. And if you're not familiar with the status of open source drivers on ARM system on chips, this announcement might not seem like a big deal, but it actually means that the BCM 2835 chip used in the Raspberry Pi is the first ARM-based multimedia system on a chip with fully functional vendor-provided, fully open-sourced drivers. That's awesome. So congrats to Broadcom and the Raspberry Pi team. Now, there are some folks who are not thrilled. Arley, the kernel graphics maintainer, Dave Arley, is rather unimpressed with the Raspberry Pi's driver release. He says that it's not something that will ever likely be merged. He says, why is this bad? You cannot make any improvements to their GLES implementation. You can't add any new extensions. You can't fix any bugs. You can't do anything with it. You can't write a Mesoglinium driver for it. In other words, you just can't.
Ouch! Ouch! Oh man. Well, then maybe they have a point there. I mean, if it's not really that helpful if you can only look at it and you can't do anything to fix it or tweak it or
I mean, if they're not going to merge it into the kernel, that kind of sucks. It's good to have it though, I guess. But if it's not very functional,
right? Yeah,
good first step.
It's a good first step. And maybe they were a little harsh on it, but who knows? When Linus gave a salute to NVIDIA, that worked out for him. So perhaps this feedback will be heard.
According to 3vol in the chat room, he says he thinks that the actual code is all in a binary blob that's in in a prom device on the. Oh, I've been correct. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, not noon Eastern. Right.
Oh.
Right. Gosh, time math, Matt. There you go. All right. Well, that's something to keep an eye on too, just because I know lots of love in the Raspberry Pi space, but also just that area is exploding. We talked about with our Runs Linux pick. I mean, just blowing up, Matt. It's the 2012 has been the year of these little devices really actually coming to fruition.
It has, man, and I think Broadcom doing what they're doing is a good first start. We'll see what they do in the future.
It acknowledges they're aware of the demand.
They are, yeah.
So cool. Something. All right, Matt. With all of that done, then that means that's all the news for this week. Now it's time to talk about securing your Linux box. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this, from the desktop to laptops and the servers. But Matt and I figured with Steam for Linux coming out soon, there's probably going to be a lot of new people jumping on the Linux bandwagon. And since we just talked about the home server stuff, there's probably a few of you deploying those. And we just cover everything in between. So we've got a bunch of beginner tips and some pro tips, as well as some great software to automate some of this stuff for you as well. So stay tuned for that. Before we get to that, we want to say thank you to System76 for rocking the support of this week's episode of the Linux Action Show. And oh, what's that? What's that? Yes, that is a gorgeous all-in-one Ubuntu running computer. Look at that thing. The Sable Complete looks like my dream computer.
It's a gorgeous PC. And one thing to mention too is a lot of folks are like, "Well, I want this with the specs, or I want that with the specs." I'm telling you, go to the configure and buy page, and you can tweak that 6 ways from Sunday. It's a really slick looking unit. They put a lot of time into it.
I have changed. When all-in-one PCs first came out, I was not a fan. I thought, oh, it's like having your VCR and your TV in one component, and if it breaks down, I can't replace it.
Right.
But the reality is thanks to the proliferation of laptops and all of these things, small embedded computers have become just as rock solid as everything else that's out there. And the small footprint and no sound That's really what's key for me, even if it's just low sound profile. I don't want to hear the computer. And that's what these things really deliver. And boy, does that thing look gorgeous. And you can put a rockin' Core i7 in that machine. I mean, let's be honest. There's no hidden performance there. You can
go in there, drop in a SSD, you go with whatever size you want. You can get real heavy into the RAM. I mean, it's got a lot of great options.
You could put a Core i7 third generation. You can get a freaking 16 gigs of RAM in this thing. So you're talking, i7 8-core beast, 1080p panel that looks just gorgeous. We got to get, if they have enough of these, Matt, we got to get one of these in for review.
That's what I'm hoping to do. Yeah, I know they've got one floating around right now, and I think OMG Ubuntu is getting one here. Not today, I believe. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up with one first, but once I'm hoping to get one here pretty soon to get in for review. We'll see.
Yes, so. I really want to put this thing through its paces. I would love to put a machine like that right here on my desk. And I think that looks
it's just gorgeous, and it's really well built too. That's the other thing, is that when System 76 does this stuff, I mean, they really go through the R&D on this.
I mean, you're talking to us right now on a System 76 PC.
I am. Yeah, I legitimately not necessarily just, we're not talking about the Wild Dog that we use for the show. I'm talking about my older PC that I purchased myself. I've been running this for years. It has never missed a beat. Ever.
Yep, they're awesome. They're awesome.
Awesome stuff. Yep.
So if you want a great Linux-supported solution, go check out System76.com. And thank you to them for sponsoring this segment. All right, Matt. Now let's talk about securing our Linux boxes. Now, you did a great write-up over at datamation.com on protecting your Ubuntu desktop, and I think a lot of the stuff that you wrote in there would apply to regular Linux, so we'll take that stuff and we'll expand upon that. So if people want more information, or if they want something they can pass around to folks to read and kind of help them secure their own system, you can send them Matt's article. We'll have that linked in the show notes. But why don't we start where you started, Matt, in your article over at Datamation? And that was with malware, Linux and malware. So why don't we start the conversation off with antivirus? Do you think we need antivirus on Linux?
At the end of the day, do we need it to protect our Linux desktop? Absolutely not. Do we need it to protect our Windows-using friends or Windows-using connected computers? It depends on whether or not you care about the outcome that they're dealing with. At the end of the day, it is their responsibility, so they should be running their own. But all Linux antivirus programs do at this stage currently is basically protect against Windows viruses. And that's a misconception. Well, you don't need an antivirus on your Linux PC. Well, not necessarily that you do, but you might want to if you're maybe networked with Windows PCs. I have actually inadvertently sent an infected file to a Windows PC here not too long ago. I found out about it because I was scanning that hard drive with a Linux antivirus. Who'd have thunk it? Did it affect me on Linux? No. Can it advance forward and go on to other PCs that are running Windows? Absolutely. It's called email or Dropbox. It's not hard. So it really comes down to personal preferences. At the end of the day, if you're a Linux exclusive person, you don't care. It's not really an issue for you. So
yeah, I agree. It's more like if you're in a Windows shop and you don't want to be the one that passes something along, because your Linux box will just go, whatever, can't even execute that. Fine.
Doesn't care.
Something else that you touched on in your article was you can use a little obscurity through obscurity, but don't rely on it. And I started a few threads about ways to little things you can obscure to sort of protect your box. What jumps to your mind when you think of obscurity through obscurity on Linux?
Well, a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm, just first of all, Linux itself being obscure in their minds on the desktop, although certainly not on the server. It's just that with so much security emphasis being placed on the server space and not so much on the desktop space, a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm running a firewall and I'm, maybe I'm running ad blockers on my browser and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. I'm fine. I don't need to really worry about the updates, or I don't really need to worry about that kind of stuff. When in reality, there's a reason why there are updates and things like that available. So that's something to consider. Also, the fact that maybe changing a port number on something that is normally being hammered, that doesn't mean that through other software you can't discover that alternative port. Trying to get too clever for your own good and depending on that exclusively can be dangerous.
I agree. Although I don't want to discount running, for example, SSH, a very common target. It's also a very handy service to have to remotely log into your machine or to remotely transfer files securely. It probably doesn't hurt anything as long as you can remember to put SSH on a different port, because at least the automated scripts that are just running and connecting, they're probably just looking for port 22. So if you put it on port 2222 or something like that, you're going to miss some stuff. But it's nothing that an Nmap scan or that like that Dsploit app for the Android device, if you ran SSH on a different port and then I ran Dsploit against it, it would identify it was SSH on a different port. It's not that hard for me to figure out. But it does pass like the low-hanging fruit script kiddie stuff.
Exactly, and I think you touched on it perfectly in saying that if someone wants into your machine, they're gonna figure out that other port. But for all the automated stuff, it will absolutely gloss right over it, and it will essentially protect you in that sense. Yeah. And of course, it's also worth pointing out that it is worth doing that simply because it's using your log file's not being bombarded by all these attempts. Right. So it's a little bit of a I hesitate to say resource saving, but it kind of is sort of maybe just from a log.
Cuts down on the noise.
Yeah, cuts down. There you go. Yeah, it's a little less background noise. So I think there's some value there. So yeah.
All right, well, why don't we kick it up another notch? So with SSH, because I think a lot of folks have SSH, and think about like your laptop. If you move around to different Wi-Fi networks and things like that, this is something that really applies to you because you're not always behind the comfort of your home firewall, or maybe you've opened the ports up and you want to intentionally allow traffic into your machine over SSH. Well, there's software out there that'll let you kind of be a little safer. Now, there's a couple different options. The one I like is called Deny Hosts. And Matt, I know you like this one too. Yep. And what's great about Deny Hosts with version 2.0 and newer is it'll actually synchronize with other Deny Host users. So you can actually build a database of known bad people who are knocking on SSH doors and trying to get in. And what Deny Host does is it's probably not as secure and as efficient as something like Fail to Ban, where Fail to Ban not only supports SSH, but things like Apache and FTP. And Fail to Ban actually works at the IP table's firewall level. It actually prevents the traffic. Deny Host, what Deny Host does is it watches the login attempts in your login file. And when it sees somebody that exceeds a certain failed login attempt threshold, the default is 5, at least for the Ubuntu package, it will automatically add them to the etchost.deny list. And it'll just say, you know what, they're not allowed in anymore. And then the kernel using TCP wrappers will start dropping those connections. Now, the downside to this is that it actually means the data comes into your computer, the kernel processes it, the kernel identifies what daemon it's supposed to go to, it sends it to that daemon, and then that daemon is checking the deny host file. And the reason why that's bad is because if that is a maliciously crafted packet, like something to trip a buffer overflow, it's still getting to the service, whereas something like Fail to Ban will actually block it before it gets that far. But if you're not worried about that, if you just want to stop somebody from logging in after a certain amount of failed attempts, Deny Host is really great. It's specific for SSH. It's very simple. It's in every distro's repo, and you almost always can just go with the defaults. So I like Deny Host quite a bit. You just install it, you set it, and forget it. Yeah,
no, it's definitely a no-brainer.
All right, all right.
Definitely liking that.
What do you think should we jump to the firewall, Matt? What do you think?
I think jumping to the firewall it's so important. I think it's worth touching on.
Yeah, you recommended a special utility because you wanted to make this accessible to all users, and I like this a lot. So tell me a little bit about why you recommended this and what it does.
Well, first of all, with any Linux distribution, and of course going with Ubuntu specifically, in the case of the article I wrote, you have your IP tables, and then it goes from basically the wrapper around that is the uncomplicated firewall, which if you're an average user and you're not a hardcore Linux person, it's still a command shell. So going with the wrapper of, I believe it is G, Uncomplicated Firewall, or Goofoo. I did. Goofoo. Yeah, it's kind of a Goofoo. Kind of going with the Goofoo theme, and that gives you a nice GUI to basically open or block ports as you see fit. Or if you don't have a clue what port you're working with, you can actually say, I want SSH enabled, or I want Samba to work, or whatever. And that's really handy because you can have your firewall enabled and you have some control over what's happening there.
Well, and the UI is simple enough that if you set, say you go over to family members and you set this up on their Ubuntu machine or whatever, and then they call you and they're like, so-and-so's here and they're trying to get to my printer. How do I turn that on the firewall? The UI is so freaking simple that you could just walk them through doing it over the phone without ever seeing their screen.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you have it installed on your own computer, for instance, you can actually just go through the steps with them. So if you're not trying to do it from memory, it's really, or you can do it from memory as well. It's really simple to do. And the fact that it's still using that the underpinnings of IP tables. I mean, at the end of the day, under all the uncomplicated stuff, that's where it all roots in. It's really nice.
Another thing that you mentioned in your article that we probably should have mentioned before we jumped off of SSH is using SSH keys in place of using a password. right?
Yeah, if there's one thing, if you're gonna have SSH running at all, and you're gonna do one thing correctly, for the love of Pete, don't use. I don't care, if you're using fail2ban or any of that other stuff. Just don't even make it an issue. Use keys. Do not use a password. That is just don't. There's no reason for it.
Yeah.
It's just not secure. Keys are.
Yeah, and you can use a key password combo. So then it's something you have, something you know. Yeah,
yeah, that would be okay. But the most important piece of it from my point of view is definitely the keys, just because there's a lot more control there, a lot more fundamental control. Passwords can get a little scary.
Yeah, and that, I would say, lumping in with that. Consider disabling any unneeded services. Now, distros have gotten really good about this, but if you see something that's running that you've installed over time, like when I play with stuff, like I noticed on my gaming rig, Postgres is installed because I was playing with the airtime software on there. For just one point, I was just playing with stuff, and you know what? I realized, geez, I've been running Postgres for a couple of weeks. It just got installed as a dependency and then was automatically added to my system startup services. And so go in there and kill that kind of stuff. And then you're reducing your quote unquote attack surface when you do that kind of stuff. So consider that. All right.
Less moving target.
Now, all of this stuff goes into the logs, right? The Linux logs are great. And if you've ever come from Windows and seen Event Viewer, when you look at the Linux logs, it's like, oh, finally I can read these log files and I actually know what they're trying to tell me. Look, there's the path, there's the file name, there's everything. It's, oh my God, it's so beautiful. But here's the problem. They're out of sight, out of mind, easy to forget. Well, that's where this next piece of software comes in. It's called LogCheck. And guess what LogCheck does? It monitors your logs for bad stuff, and then sends you email alerts based on thresholds. And maybe that's failed login attempts. Maybe that's a service that failed to start. Maybe that's a hard drive error, a smart error that's being generated. All of that stuff can be captured by LogCheck and then have it automatically email you the results. Configuring LogCheck is super simple. In fact, if you really just want to get started, you can install LogCheck and then just go edit its config file and just put your email address in there. And you can literally just start at that.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And then, what a time saver, because I'm not always thinking to do this stuff.
Well,
I love that.
And even if you just have like multiple boxes, Matt, and you want to, I have systems here in the studio that run 24/7. I'm not checking their logs.
Exactly.
I forget all about it. But if I can sit down in the morning and go, I have an email from I need to go look at that, right?
Right.
And LogCheck is super easy to set up. It works great on the server. It works great on the desktop. And if you have it on a laptop, you can set up your mail server so that it'll automatically queue it up and email it next time you have connectivity. I'll include a how-to for Ubuntu in here. But all of them are very simple to set up. So that's LogCheck, and I've loaded that, and I like it quite a bit. And you got to be careful. So I've adjusted the thresholds a little bit because you also don't want to get spam. If you have a box that just spits a ton of stuff to the logs, you do kind of have to watch for that.
Although I would say if you're using something like Gmail or even just a localized client, set a rule so that when you know what the subject line of that is, have it sent to a specific box, a specific directory. That way it's all out of your inbox, but at the same time you're seeing this stuff come in and you can check that. Now,
Matt, you put a one-sentence line in here that you marked in bold, or your editor did, that is just so brilliant, because you can just really sum all of it down to this as far as the risk that a user can put a Linux system under. I love this line you have in here, Matt. Anything executable is dangerous.
Yes, I see what you're saying now. Yes, and that's the one thing that there's a little history with that statement. Years ago, back before smartphones were really a big deal, I wrote an article pointing out that we would enter a time period where malware and things of that sort would, in fact, be coming to smartphones. We know this to be true.
Yeah.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever read. And so, people just they berated me for probably a month. I think someone even created like a specific forum thread just based on that alone, making fun of me. And but it's common sense. If it can be executed, it can, it can be run. It's not, of course, it's not read only. That is in fact dangerous. So if on any Linux system, I can literally give someone a single command, make that a bash script, say, hey, go ahead and just hit that run in terminal thing and know when you're going with it, it's going to do what I want you to do. Oh, it's asking for your password. No, that's okay. Go ahead and enter that. People don't think about this stuff. So if it's executable, it is in fact dangerous.
And so
very dangerous.
I'll show folks how you can check for that. So there's two different ways to check. I'll show you under Nautilus and I'll show you under the command line.
Yeah.
So under the command line, go into a directory that you want. I'm in my downloads directory right here because that's a good place to check. And if you do ls-l in the terminal, you'll get a list. Anything that has an X on in the far left-hand column at the end of it means that it can be executed by the user. So you see right here, I have my user has read, write, and execute. All the users have read, write, execute, and everyone has read, write, execute on some of these files. Right. And so you want to be careful with that kind of stuff. And it's really easy to go in there and just take the execute bit away and re-add it if you need it. You can also do it through your file manager. They all support this. I'm just in Nautilus right now, but let's take this FBI seal.png. You could actually make this executable. And so this was kind of scary, is it could be named .png, but it could actually be a shell script. And if it's executable, it'll run the shell script. You can
and people think, well, I've got my pseudo password that'll protect me. No, it won't. Most people, if they've clicked on something and it prompts them for that, they won't think twice about it. So yeah, right. Exactly.
Now you can see on Nautilus here, there's a checkbox that says execute, and mine's unchecked for this image. You might see it checked there, and you can just uncheck it, and that's another way to turn off the executable status. So if you've got scripts and things like that you're a little worried about, that's something you can do. Now, if they're not going to execute on their own, you have to execute them. But why leave something around like that you're not sure about?
Additional family members could potentially execute it without your knowledge. I mean, you may know better, but other folks may not. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about how to find out if somebody has executed something on your box. You suspect you've been compromised. You think maybe somebody did do something. Maybe somebody installed a Trojan or a rootkit on your machine, and you want to find out if that's happened. Well, I'll be honest with you. There are rootkit checkers out there that'll go and check your essential binary files to see if they've been replaced, do checksums and things like that. But the reality is, you've got to have something set up before you get compromised. It's best to do this stuff on a clean install, and that's how you can really track stuff down. So, in my demo machine here, I have done a clean install, and I have installed something called Tripwire. Now, Tripwire requires a lot of fine-tuning, so this is more of an advanced tool, but Tripwire is an intrusion detection system, and it monitors your file system and configuration files and binaries and everything, and looks for inappropriate changes based on the last time it's done a snapshot. So I'll just show you a quick demo. Now, out of the box on modern distros, it does require a lot of tweaking. Like for right now, it is monitoring my proc file system, and proc is changing constantly as different processes run, so it's constantly reporting violations in proc, but we'll just ignore that point. And I could go into the Tripwire policy file, and I could there's guides online to clean that up. Anyways, so I have installed Tripwire here on my system, and what you do is once you install Tripwire, you create a policy file, tell it what things to monitor, and then you run a initialization snapshot. And this is where your system needs to be good at this point. But it'll go through and it'll crawl through your entire box and monitor and record every single detail into a database. And then you can automatically have it run against that known good snapshot and tell you all of the changes. And if there's been big changes beyond a certain threshold, it can send you an email alert. And you can also run the check whenever you want. So here we have on my machine, you can see I'm getting a ton of error messages because of /proc. I mean, it's just, I get like page after page. It's thousands of lines of error messages. So again, this is not a very easy tool, but if you know what you're doing, you can go and clean that up. But I'll go back up past my /proc error messages here, and when I get to the top, I will see an output of the report. Hopefully, if I haven't lost in my scrollback buffer here. Oh, almost there. Okay, so here it is. So here is all of my user files that have changed. You can see since I last took my snapshot, /user/sbin has been changed. There's files under sbin that have changed. That's because I've done a system update. So I did a snapshot before a system update, so that way I could generate a lot of change. Now here is the money shot. Here is my overall snapshot. And I can see by looking at this screenshot that I have my root file executables. There's been 2,200 files change as of that system update. So sometimes this is just a great way to kind of get an overall picture of what updates do too, because you're recording everything that gets changed, every library that gets touched, right? So it can see here that my boot services have been modified, and it'll tell you the different warning level and different concern, different criticality of that type of change, right? And this is a system where you can have it then. So I will have tonight an email in my inbox that will be this report, and if I had 3 or 4 boxes, or even up to hundreds of boxes, I'd have all these email reports. I could look back, oh, this system had this change, this system had that change. It's a good way to track changes. It's a good way to find out if somebody's gotten onto your system. If you have a web server and you suspect somebody's replaced a binary with a rootkit, You can see if a file's been changed, and this is all through Tripwire. It hasn't been updated in a while, but with a little tweaking, you can get it working on a modern Linux box, and it's in the repos. So Tripwire, I used to use professionally. I used to use their commercial product, and you can tie it in with management consoles, and you can monitor all of your systems and see all of the things change and improve and roll back and all kinds of really neat stuff. So that's Tripwire, and it's absolutely free.
Sweet.
All right. Now I've got another tool that is really cool, and it's sort of along the same lines of Tripwire, but it's more like it's a little post checking. So you think maybe something's happened, and you want to just go through a checklist and make sure your box is sort of meeting a certain basic requirements of what you might consider secure, and that's called Tiger. It's the Unix security checking program. It's in most repos as just Tiger, and when you run Tiger, it'll go through and check your password files, your group files, check the user accounts on your system. It'll check all of your path settings. It'll validate your FTP server settings. It'll validate your cron settings. It'll validate your NFS exports. It'll validate file system permissions. It'll run through all of that stuff and generate you a report of any of those things. It'll go through and check essential binaries for rootkits. It includes Check Rootkit, which is a tool that you recommended. To go through and it'll check for rootkits and all kinds of stuff. And that's Tiger. And Tiger is the Unix security audit and intrusion detection tool. And it's a really neat tool, too.
Nice.
Yes,
like
Matt. Yes, and it's just recently added support for BSD, as the chat room is asking. And
That's
now,
cool.
Tiger, I have Tigers loaded here. I think it's a little slow, but I'll see what you get if I run it right now.
All right.
So Tiger's running right now, and it's going through, and let's see. It checks. Okay, yeah, it'll go through and do all the checks right now. It'll take a while, but I included a screenshot in the show notes if you kind of want to see what it looks like.
Yeah.
This is a great validation. This will go through and validate that you haven't really bonered up your FTP config, or this will go through and validate that you haven't bonered up the user accounts. It'll tell you if certain user accounts have login and shell access that shouldn't, like a service account, and like the user account your FTP and web server run as. There's no real reason those generally need the ability to have a login shell, and it'll generate an alert if they do. So it'll tell you if you're not following some best practices. It's sort of like a best practice validation tool. That's very cool. And it's free, of course. It's called Tiger.
Can't be free.
No, you can't. You can't. All right, Matt, was there any other aspects you think we should touch on?
One other thing I was going to talk about, and this is something that probably will never affect most people, but does affect those that like to tweak the performance of their hard drive, and that is the HD PARM configuration. If you it basically, and I've got this in my article, and you can kind of touch on that, but basically, if you mess this up, and a lot of people do tweak it, if you mess this up, it is potentially possible over the length of time, over, I don't know, maybe a month or so, maybe a little longer, you can actually physically damage your hard drive. It goes beyond malware. And basically what I bring that up as is it serves as a reminder is if you're making tweaks that you don't understand, research the documentation from a trusted source before you go tweaking your stuff. It's really important, because a lot of times the advice you're getting from forums and things like that is not all that accurate. Some of the stuff I read is just unbelievably bad. Another thing to consider is just because it comes in a Debian package or comes from a PPA does not mean that you should just absolutely wholeheartedly trust it. A PPA is a repository created by a user that is not supported by Ubuntu proper or by trusted developers. This is something that you have done the research on and you are trusting. So anything and everything could be up there. Thus far, we've all been very fortunate, but that does not mean that it's impossible that something may be amiss. Maybe something was coded poorly, or there's a flaw, or maybe it's just malicious. You don't know. So do your research before you go installing stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yep, absolutely. Now, I've included links in the show notes to install a lot for tutorials and repos to install a lot of the software we've talked about today. I've also included a video, 334, Chris Jenkins' Intro to Linux Hardening. This is a video from DerbyCon 2012 where he goes into the steps that he does. He's a security contractor, and he goes into the steps he does to secure Linux boxes. It's a 35-minute video. He walks through tools. He goes into more detail about securing things like cups, the printing system, securing things like your firewall through IP tables, what changes you should make in SSD, like not permitting root logins in the SSD config, and extra things like that. He talks about a couple of the tools that I covered. So you can check out, we'll have a link to that in the show notes if you want to watch his presentation. I leave with, my final thought is the complete security picture is also having, if you're really worried about this, some kind of backup of your system in its good state. Mondo Rescue, Ghost imaging, those are all, what's the name of the one that I've actually reviewed and used? I'm blanking on the name, but
I can't remember.
There's a lot of Part Image is another one. There's a lot of good imaging solutions out there that will allow you to take, hell, you can use DD if you want. They'll allow you to take a snapshot of your Linux system in a good state. And you can always revert back to that. And think about what that really means. If you have a known good system, and that means you can go play with stuff and screw it all up and then revert back to that image. And then, worst case, 3-4 months down the road, at worst, you're going to have some updates you have to install when you reload that image. So consider looking into that. It's definitely like I think the last ultimate thing you can do for security is have a known good state, get it all set up, get it all patched, and then boom, snapshot.
Exactly.
And leave it as it is.
Definitely agree with that. Backups are so important.
Clonezilla is the
Clonezilla. There it is. Yep.
Yeah. And I've done reviews of Clonezilla. It's been ages. You can find an old video review from me on that if you want.
I might even add to that, in addition to cloning your partition setup, sometimes it's also wise to just keep a separate backup of your home directory, completely separate from your installation. And the only reason for that is that if, goodness forbid, something goes wrong with your restoration, it's kind of nice having the raw home directory data available. I've had that happen before. To where I actually had an image made that did not restore. And because I had my home directory backed up on one of the various cloud services, or maybe even a local external hard drive, it saved my bacon.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, seriously. And I had a dedicated home anyway, so it didn't matter. But so, so I would definitely say that's important, but don't put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to backing up. Have multiple tiers, backups for your backups for your backups, and then backups for that backup.
Yeah, especially if it's like family photos and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so and now I feel like we're only scratching the surface.
Oh yeah, but no, this is very, very remedial. Yeah,
I think like we wanted to give you guys some tips for beginners, some software if you're a little more comfortable, and some tips for more pro type people too. And I think like LogCheck would be the perfect package to install in that home server we talked about last week, because the thing about a home server, if you've done it right, it just kind of sits in the corner and you don't really think about it. It just runs, right? It's another out of sight, out of mind type deal. And having LogCheck installed on something like that will hopefully give you a heads up before something happens, like a hard drive fails or something like that. So I think LogCheck, for security or just for best practices, probably everybody should install LogCheck.
Definitely.
So we have a link to that in the show notes. All right, Matt.
Yep. And one last thing, if you're wanting to go and explore the stuff deeper, or maybe you want to dive deeper into the security stuff, there's a lot of really great books out there. Just head on over to Amazon and check those out. There's just Linux security. Look at the reviews. There's a lot of good stuff. So
yeah. Yep. I even have some over there. I'll thumb through, and if I still think it's pretty relevant, I'll toss a link to it in the show notes.
Yeah. There you go. Okay.
All right. There you go. Well, that's the Linux Action Show's tips to secure your Linux box. And that brings us to the end of this week's show. But before we get out of here, Matt, we've got some feedback to get to. Are you ready for the first email?
Let's hear it.
This one really is sort of pointed at me because I've been derelict in my duties. It comes from Kevin, and he says, "Hey, Chris, I'll keep this short and sweet. When you talk about Android picks, can you please be more specific when you say free? I don't only use FOSS apps, but I do prefer them. It would be awesome if you could mention what you mean by quote-unquote free, whether it's free as it is by saying open source or free as in it's free to use. Thanks, Kevin." I'd say when it comes to the Android Play Store, you can almost always bet that when I say free, I don't mean open source. Almost always. It's very rare. But when it is open source, I'll try to mention it. Like the one I mentioned last week, I mentioned it was free until it, and then once it gets like a certain amount, it's going to go open source. Dsploit today is open source. That's not in the Play Store, though, so that's a little more common. I don't know of a lot of open source apps in the Android Play Store, although I'm sure there's a bunch that I just don't realize. But I'll try to be more aware of that, and I'll try to make mention of it, Kevin.
Yeah, definitely.
No promises, but I'll give it a best shot. All right, this one comes from Robert, and he's having a little bit of soul-searching issues here, Matt. Maybe we can help him out with, okay?
All right.
He says, "Hi, Chris and Matt. I think our server episode got him thinking. I'm going to be helping a friend set up a server/NAS, which will be used to store data from his 3 Windows 7 PCs. Initially, I was thinking him to get a pre-built NAS, but they have certain limitations, as we likely know. So then I thought, why not build a system? Now, what to use, FreeNAS or Linux? Also, should I use RAID support built into the motherboards or use separate RAID controllers? Also, I will need to be able to back up his data and store it offsite. So overall, I need something that is going to be reliable, be able to expand the storage capabilities easily, and manage it for my friend. What do you guys recommend? And keep up the great work on LAS and TechSnap.
I think the only thing that, I mean, I think definitely building his own is definitely the way to go. But I think the one thing he touched on when he's talking about RAID support, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, Chris, but I believe that by going with RAID support built into the board instead of built into whatever operating system you're running into, you're closing some doors on potential issues after updates and tweaks and things like that.
Yeah. There is definitely advantage to that. I say it depends on the RAID. If you're doing a Linux box and you're going to do like a Samba server and you're going to do extended for the like where the big data store is going to be, I say go hard. I would say use the hardware RAID. And most motherboard RAID controllers at this point are good enough. You just kind of have to look at their specs. If you're going to go FreeNAS, there's probably a really good chance you actually want to go software RAID. With ZFS, ZFS is like the volume manager, it's like the RAID manager, and it's the file system. It's this whole holistic approach to managing your disk. And ZFS can actually be very intelligent about managing things like RAID. You just have to have a lot of memory and stuff like that. So on my FreeNAS server, I'm actually using software RAID, right?
Okay.
If I was doing a Linux box, I'm not a huge fan of Linux as software. MD RAID's fine. There's some advantages to it, but I'd probably say go hardware in that case. And it usually performs a little better.
And what kind of minimum specs, if he's building it himself, what types of things would you think he should be looking at as far as resources?
ZFS is memory hungry, so you might go 8 gigs of memory on a ZFS box if you're doing FreeNAS, because you just get good performance that way. Yeah. If you're doing a Linux box, you can go pretty low. The only thing I would say is if he's going to be doing backups and stuff like that, you need to do compression. You might want to think about the CPU resources. And overall, Matt, I think because this is for his friend and not for him,
right.
I think he should go FreeNAS, because then FreeNAS just had a brand new release, and they have a very nice web management portal that he could access to do remote administration, but even for the basics, his friend could use, even if his friend is a 100% Windows user, right?
Makes sense.
I think that's the key part there is he's not going to have to call him for every single little question, right? And it does easy stuff like checkbox, turn on media streaming, a web UI, add a share, add users. And if it's like he mentioned, it's for a small business, if somebody new starts and he wants to add an account, FreeNAS makes that super easy just to add the new user account, right? It's all you just do it through the web admin front page. And then you get ZFS, and that takes care of your RAID issues. There's some serious advantages to that, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
So there you go. All right. Robert in Australia, good luck with that. And let us know how it goes. All right. One follow-up I have from last week's episode. It was pointed out by Oak Rider for Life in response to our Perfect Server episode, Matt. He says, so in response to the question that Bobby wrote in, now you remember Bobby wanted to back up all of the software. He wanted a whole list of all the software he installed on his machine, so that way he could reload his box and then just reinstall all of the software that he knows he likes, right?
Yep.
Well, in response to that question that Bobby had, he may, this is Oak Rider for Life, may or may not have answered nearly an identical question in the subreddit, and based on that question, he may have just created a bash script which will take care of this for Bobby. And in fact, he did, and he has it linked in the show notes.
Nice.
You can grab this, and he will create not only a backup of what you have installed, but all of the repositories that you connect to, all of their GPG keys, all of the PPAs, and then on the new box, it'll intelligently reinstall and re-add all of that stuff for you on the new setup.
Oh, I love that. I love that, especially the fact that it handles the PPAs and the keys and everything. That's a big time saver.
Yeah, exactly. Love that. So Oak Rider for Life, thank you for doing that. And we've linked to his post in the Linux Action Show subreddit where you can find the scripts for that. So there you go. We're doing a shorter feedback segment this week, but if you want to get yours in, you can email us, linuxactionshow@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or start a thread in our subreddit, or use the contact link at the top of jupiterbroadcasting.com. Matt, where can people find what you're doing throughout the week?
You can always find me at matthartley.com. Things have been a little slow over there lately, but I hope to be catching up a little later this week. And as always, you can find me at datamation.com. And if you want to head over to the show notes, there is actually an authorship link that you can just follow everything I'm doing if you just want to read my stuff specifically. There you go. Just the Matt Hartley feed. Yeah. I like that. So super simple. Link to that in the show notes. All right. Well, just a reminder, I'm looking for foreign correspondents for Unfilter, for people that are outside the United States that are plugged into the news scene, and you guys know what's going on and you want your perspective heard on the Unfilter show. Well, we take your voicemails, and we're hoping to have people call in and report on stuff going on all around the world, so go check that out.
go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, find the Unfiltered Show, and in the show notes you can find our phone number. And go check that show out. We just got done covering the third-party presidential debates, which, you know, depending on how you're going to vote, that you may or may not find it interesting, but they really have some interesting perspectives on things, and we played some highlights from our favorite moments. And it was really interesting to just hear a completely different perspective than what you hear from coming from the
I found it quite refreshing.
Yeah, it is kind of refreshing, exactly.
Yeah, just because, I mean, they're not all in agreement with everything. So, I mean, you definitely got some interesting dialogue going. It was really cool.
Yeah, yeah. Especially around colleges and stuff like that. So go check out the latest episode of Unfiltered if you want to catch that. Also, the Jupiter Signal, our monthly newsletter, will be coming out mid-next week, and we have a couple of articles we're writing up for that. You can go over to bit.ly/Jupiter Signal to sign up to our monthly newsletter. We only send out once a month, and we promise not to spam. And I think it's like, you know, it's the last week of October. We're probably going to be sending it out, I think, like Wednesday or something. I don't remember. And one last plug, since I'm just plugging everything away. The Faux Show on Wednesday lands on Halloween. And we're going to do a Halloween special. So if you don't hate Halloween and you don't have plans to be outside your house, join us over at jblive.tv at 8 p.m. Pacific for the Faux Show. We'll be doing a Halloween special. And I might even be dressing up.
Oh, that would be cool. You got to, yeah.
I might have gotten a costume just for the Faux Show. Maybe.
Sweet.
Maybe. We'll have to see.
Power Ranger. I'll bet you're going to go Power Ranger, right?
Oh, man. I'd want to be the pink Power Ranger. That'd be so cool.
Oh, my.
No, yes. Matt, no. No, you just have to wait and find out. You just have to tune in to see. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Linux Action Show, and we'll see you right back here next week. All right, Matt, let's do this thing.
All righty.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? That sounds delicious. What? You would make a burger now? That's great. I want a burger. You know, 'cause